Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we're taking a look at the Real Steel Akuma, and this is a knife that I like a lot. There are so many things that I want to touch on here, and the first thing is this is kind of like a breath of fresh air for budget knives. All right, there are tons of great budget knives, and I'm not discounting any of them in particular, but at the same time, there is like a flood of D2 liner lock flippers on bearings, right? There are so many, and honestly, when I hear about another one, it's kind of hard to get excited. It's kind of hard to care. So I saw this, first time I saw this one was on Ivan Bregnitz is the designer here, and I'm probably butchering his name, but he's the designer. I saw this on his Instagram, and I started doing a little bit of research, figured out what it was, and followed up with Justin over at White Mountain Knives, who where I was able to pick this up from. By the way, if you use my discount code Sharp Stuff, you can save 10% over there. So go give Justin a quick visit. Anyway, long story short, I was compelled by the looks of this and the design, and then when I actually got this in hand and started spending some time with it, the love just grew. There are many things that I like about this knife. So without further ado, let's start with one of those things, which is size and weight. Certainly I like larger stuff, and this is on the larger size at 8.5 inches, almost 3/4 of an inch of blade. It's not quite there, but call it 3 and a big 5/8 if you want. 4 and 13/16 on the handle, which is nice, right? That's considerably under 5 inches, right? Which is nice. And finally, the weight on this, 4.2 ounces. I'm rounding a little bit. I think it might have been like 4.18 on my scale, but 4.2 ounces for a knife of this size with this blade length and this amount of handle real estate, to me, that's a win, right? This knife for its size weighs very little. So right off the hop, I picked this up and I'm like, hey, this is not too heavy for what it is. That's pretty cool. And the enjoyable stuff doesn't really stop there. If there is something to complain about, any knife of this size could be a bit of a pocket hog, but I really, my rule is I just carry my knife in my front right pocket anyway. I don't try to fit a bunch of other stuff in there. So it doesn't matter, I guess, as much to me how big something is. But I guess, yeah, this is it is a full half-inch thick, which makes that handle quite hand-filling. But the trade-off is, yeah, it's a bit noticeable in pocket. So blade. We've got past size and weight, which I do really like. Moving on to the blade. This is K110 steel with a flat grind, satin finish, drop point here. I've got to point out, first off, very thin behind the edge. Now, pretty substantial blade stock. You can take a look there. It's 144 thousandths, which is not thin, okay, but it's very thin behind the edge, which means when you go to cut stuff with this, it still cuts really well. K110 is Bowler's version of D2, and this has performed really nice for me. So I really can't complain about that. There's a very slight, I don't know, I changed my mind about this, but I think there is a very slight recurve here, but it's so small that it doesn't bother me. And certainly if you were sharpening on flat stones or on some kind of guided system, it wouldn't affect that at all. I've only stropped this because it's actually held up really well for me, which tells me they've done a decent job with heat treating this steel. And of course, the other thing that helps about that in terms of cutting performance is it's 16 thousandths behind the edge, which I may have already mentioned, but that really thin, I should say, edge geometry is going to help with cutting performance, and it's going to feel like it stays sharper longer. Because it just moves through material so much easier. The other thing I have to comment on before we move on from the blade is it's really well rounded. So you see how I've got big thick blade stock here. It does taper, of course, down to the point, but there's quite a bit of material. So they've done, I think, a really nice job of balancing, making this blade tough and durable and confidence inspiring. Like, I'm not worried about this breaking. I don't feel like this is something I can't use for all kind of, some knives you go, well, I better not use it for that because I might break it. You don't get that with this knife. But it still cuts really well. So I think they've got a really nicely balanced blade. I'm not going to talk about the hole yet because we'll talk about that when we get to deployment, which is where we want to go next. So this is a liner lock. You can see the liner exposed right there, and it's really nicely done, easily accessible. The action, by the way, is amazing. For a knife of this price point, this is just not what you get. Okay. And so that's here's where we start to see the breath of fresh air. Okay. They've done some really neat stuff with this knife that I wish other budget producers would go, hey, let's not do the same exact thing. Let's do some things a little bit different, and Real Steel really has taken that approach with this knife. Of course, Ivan's design is what drives that, and so Ivan has really gotten creative here, and it's a very, very welcome offering. So what we have here is a liner lock. First thing I want to point out is the way they've done the liner lock is there's a steel insert on the lock side. It's fully G10 on the non-locking side. Okay, so on the show side, that means we get that really nice light weight, which is really great. Moving on from there, we've got a liner that's extremely accessible, super duper comfortable, no issue whatsoever. Then, in terms of deployment methods, we have a thumb stud, which you saw me just use there a second ago. There you go, thumb stud works great. We have a flipper right here, very minimal flipper tab, which again is really, really nice. It's so great to see this being implemented on a budget knife where you don't always see this kind of stuff. Finally, we also have the opening hole, which means I can spidey flick this knife. And so we have 3 different opening mechanisms, and all of that is riding on dual row ceramic bearings. So I'm going to roll a picture in of the bearings because that is a showstopper. At $70 to get dual row ceramic bearings is fantastic. And I think Real Steel, I could be lying, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I think Real Steel has done this before. I think the G10 Megalodon had or has dual row ceramic bearings. Now, if you get one and take it apart and I'm lying, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to have to go back and watch my review to see if it at least did have dual row ceramic bearings. At the very least, the action was very, very nice. The action is superb on this. Those dual row ceramic bearings work so well, and that's something you're just not used to seeing at the $70 price point. And to me, it's fantastic. Not only does it make the knife more, it inspires more confidence. So we've already got this fairly substantial blade stock. Now you use dual row ceramic bearings, which means you're distributing the force over a larger area, giving that a little more longevity. Of course, they are done right. The bearings are riding on stainless steel washers that are nested inside of the liners on both sides. I will roll in a picture here so that you can see what I'm talking about with the bearings and the way the whole thing is constructed. I shared that a little while ago on Instagram, so you may have already seen those pictures. So the action on this and the deployment methods are fantastic, and it's by Ivan's own admission, this is sort of designed to be a fidget toy for knife guys. And it really is that, right? And I do find myself just sitting here playing with this knife. The action is so good. It's so smooth. Now I did take this apart. I cleaned it up. I put a little KPL in there, and all of that did make a difference. And now the action is even better than it was out of box, and it was great out of box. Okay, now having said that, it might not hurt you, by the way, to do that to your own. There was a little Loctite in there, but it wasn't so much that I couldn't take the knife down. And these little proprietary screws worked great. I just put a bit of masking tape over my screwdriver heads, took this thing apart really easily, and cleaned it up, and it was definitely worth it. So the next thing I want to talk about for a second is, okay, do we need all of the deployment methods? Do we need a thumb stud plus an opening hole plus a back flipper? And really, this knife is close. You almost could have just cut this G10 down a little bit and had a front flipper as well. They didn't decide to do that, but then you would have been like 4 for 4, right? Every possible way you can open a knife, you could open this knife. I will add this one slight detraction. You can see that the knife works fine, and so it's a very small nitpick here. I could stand for the detent to be just a little bit stiffer. Not a lot, but just a hair stiffer. And that's really the only complaint that I can make about this action. Uh, it is so well done, and it really is probably the most fidgety knife I own, and to the point that I'm starting to get spoiled. So now if I grab a knife and it only has a flipper or it only has thumb studs, I'm like, wait, what? There's no other way to open this? What am I'm like bored sitting here waiting, wanting there to be some other options for flipping my knife while I'm, sitting on the couch watching TV or something like that. All right, so that's action. The lockup is very good. I had this lock, or I mean, this pivot screw did loosen up on me a couple of times, and the explanation for that is all that happened is when I cleaned it apart, when I took it apart and cleaned it, I got a little oil on the threads, which is not really where you want the oil. Anyway, because of that, it did give me some issues. I took this screw out, cleaned the oil off, and put it back in, and it's been better since. I haven't bothered with any Loctite, but I probably will. Most of the time, I do, Loctite my knives at a particular point where I like them. Okay, now that I've talked about the various opening mechanisms on this, which I do like, we're going to come back and re-examine that. And I know this is getting to be a longer video already, but there's a lot to cover here. There's a lot of little details that this knife has that you don't always see. So let's talk about the handle. The handle here, I love the handle construction. This side is just G10. We've got a G10 backspacer, proprietary screws there, which are, while they're different and interesting looking, they're really common. A slot screwdriver works just fine. The standoff, this is about the only thing that I feel like detracts from the design. I would have liked for this to be sort of clean and just come right around. And you do, because of the orange liners, I feel like this is a knife you're going to want to kind of look at all the way around. It kind of draws your eye to check out other parts. Reversible pocket clip. All right, you can pull this out and flip it. Hold on, I want to make sure I'm not lying to you. Yeah, you could flip this to the other side and it'll look a little bit different. Okay, it's obviously designed mostly to be right side tip up carry, but it will work to flip it the other way. Construction, there's really not too much to complain about, and I really like, and I've said this a lot, but I really like when a company goes with just G10. It gives you tons of strength, more strength than you'd ever need in a folding knife, and yet it does reduce the weight substantially by opting out of one steel liner. That does make a difference. And they've even, the steel on this side is sort of just enough to make the lock function and to have some metal backing up the internal blade stops there. Finally, ergonomics. What I would say about the ergonomics, this is the only point that I'm not totally in love with. It feels fine and it's comfortable and I can easily work with it and cut stuff, and I have, and I have no real complaints about it, but it's not as good as some knives out there. When I talk about just super ideal ergonomics, I'm thinking of something like the 8010 or the Benchmade Super Freak. I've got one here on the table where you've got that nice 3D contouring. Like, this just feels so good in hand. And so those squared off liners don't feel quite as good as something like that, but they're more than adequate. Finally, let's get to some comparisons. All right, so first up, I wanted to throw in the Civivi Shredder. This is probably my favorite Civivi at this point. I didn't get one right away, and I really, really should have. I love this knife. The only sort of detraction I would give is the blade stock is pretty thin, and so for a fairly large knife, this isn't something I would want to have to use, to put on under any kind of really, really hard use. Now, this has 2 out of the 3 options, okay? The Shredder can do the Spidey Flick. It can do the flipper tab. So it's close. I like it almost as much as the Akuma. I actually may do a full comparison between these two because I really find myself on budget knife day when I'm going to carry something cheaper. These two have really been beating out everything else. There's some stuff I purposely carry for review. Let's quickly throw in the Kaiser Gemini. Smaller than I want, but I wanted to just kind of overseas produced liner lock, doing something a little bit different. Again, micarta and N690 steel with the stonewash. I like when these knives are not just G10 liner lock with D2 steel. So it's a welcome offering. Now, this knife I'll only throw in here as sort of an honorable mention, if you will, only because one of the themes of this video is companies who are willing to do something a little bit different and kind of step outside the box. Certainly the takedown option on the CRKT Bonafide is interesting. Now the price point on this is $100, which I do think is kind of out of line, but it does have some cool features and I don't hate the design. What else have we got here? Oh, another real steel. Again, sticking with the theme of doing something a little bit different, but still being highly functional, we've got the Real Steel Phasma. So it's a stainless steel liner lock. I went with the free because I liked the minimalism of the design. It does mean that I have to do that little pinch deployment here, which, you know, it doesn't bother me. What I love about this knife is it's so classy and so cool and so minimalistic. Again, it's in a sea of D2 liner locks, it's great to see something just a little bit different. And Real Steel tends to be willing to do that a little more than some other companies. Rat Model 1, you know, here's the knife that started it all, and it's the knife that still, the influence is still being felt, right? Everyone loved this knife. And I think what happened is knife companies were like, wait, if we make a liner lock in D2 steel, everyone will buy it. Great, let's go. And that's all everyone made. So, well, I love the Rat Model 1. It's a classic knife. It'll fit, you know, it'll suit so many people's needs. You know, it's nice to see a different offering and something that's going a little above and beyond for still a very budget price point. Just for size comparison, I'll throw in a PM2. The other thing that's cool about this, you know, the compression lock is a very fidgety lock. So certainly this is a knife that, in terms of the fidget factor, you know, sitting on the couch flicking your knife open, this definitely competes. And so does the Super Freak, which I had in here a second ago. Both very fidgety, very fun knives. Not at all in the same ballpark in terms of price. So overall, guys, I think you can see why I like this knife. It's not perfect. There's been a couple little hiccups that I talked about, and I would suggest that perhaps this design isn't for every single person out there. But overall, yeah, you're paying a couple bucks more. So, you know, most of the D2 liner locks I'm talking about come in around $50. So, you know, you're going to pay 70 for this minus, you know, you can get a disc, you can use my discount and save yourself a little bit. But for 70 bucks, that extra 20 bucks, you really are getting a lot, right? The fidget factor, the lighter weight, the dual row ceramic bearings, which is unheard of for, you know, less than a few $100s. So there's a lot that this knife brings to the table. Also the balance. They've done a great job giving me a knife that's tough and durable and reliable. Well, not, you know, it's not crazy. And I wouldn't compare this to a Recon 1 or anything like that, but it's definitely confidence inspiring. So, yeah, you get something different, you get something interesting, you get something fun, lots of cool upgrades, and so yeah, useful, fun, and affordable. What more could I say about this knife? I think this one is one that most people are going to want to check out. And if you know, this is not a knife that appeals to you, I would still want to go to a store, get this in my hand, and experience it because it's a really, really cool offering. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.